The book is Squire and Knight, which is really good. You're going to really like this if you haven't already read it. We are super lucky to be joined by the author, Scott Chantler, who is right there. Hello. Scott. Did I pronounce that right? I forgot to ask before the show. I mean, seems like that should be Chantler, right?
It's like Chantler.
Okay, Chantler, not Chantler. Yeah. Okay, there we go.
Pretty much how it looks. It seems to me like it should be a hard name to mess up, but I've gotten all kinds of variations over the years.
Yeah.
So you did just fine.
Yeah. Well, you never know. I mean,
you can never be quite sure.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm usually good about asking ahead of time, but I was so confident that I had it right that anyway.
Yeah.
Good morning and welcome to the show. And let's talk about comics. My first question's the same for every show, just because I love this question, and it's why comics? Of all the things that you could be doing in the world, why did you pick this particular art form? You know, an art form that we were mentioning ahead, before the show, is really labor intensive. Is really you have to sit at your desk and just like work. Why do you love the medium, man?
I mean, in some ways, it's a strange question. I mean, it's like asking sort of like why film or why music or why dance or architecture. Like I feel like in some way your medium kind of chooses you. If you sort of asked why the ballet, a person would tell you because I'm a ballet dancer. And I feel like I'm a cartoonist. This is my medium. If you're a person who can use words and pictures sort of interchangeably, why choose? Why choose one or the other? I started my career as an illustrator in the 90s, and that wasn't quite it. It wasn't quite about picture making for me. It needed to be more about storytelling. Similarly, I have tried to write prose, and I did some writing in high school and university and stuff, and I can do it. But, a couple of times I've sat down and said to myself, why am I spending all this time, drawing these stories when I could, just kind of type them up in prose in a fraction of the time? And I get 2 paragraphs in and I'm like, clearly I just want to draw this. It would take more time, but I could be so much more specific, showing people what's in my head rather than trying to describe it. So I guess that's my answer is sort of, the medium chose me. I feel like there's really never been a point in my life where I haven't, obviously I've been doing it professionally for a while, but, even when I was a really small little kid, I was making my own comics and trying to sell them to the neighbors and, nice. Stuff like that. So it's just how I express myself.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you have any of those still hanging around, the ones you did when you were a kid?
I do. I should have pulled them out. This is the second interview I've done recently where this has come up, and I haven't had those ready to show. I gotta just put them here. But yeah, I have a couple of comics that I made. I'm going to date myself here, that I made in 1977. Wow. when I was 5 years old. I was staying with my grandmother, and I made a Batman comic and a Spider-Man comic, and I sold them to her neighbor for 25 cents each. And on my 16th birthday, she gave them back to me as a birthday present, which is how I have them now.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, and they're hilarious. They're just they're exactly what you'd think 5-year-old would do with it's just like a close-up of Spider-Man with a word balloon and the number 4 in it. All I really knew was numbers and letters.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So I'll take it from that the earliest comics you remember reading were superhero comics then.
Yeah, I probably got into comics via the 1960s Batman TV show with Adam West, which is a little before my time. But if you were a little kid in the 70s, you know that everything on afternoon TV in the 70s was a rerun from the 60s.
Exactly.
So a lot of that kind of, just fun, crazy 60s TV, like Batman and the Monkees and stuff like that was a big influence on me. And I think I probably had seen the Batman TV show and kind of realized there were comics at some point and started bugging my parents to buy me the comics. And and off we went.
Yeah. Yeah. And I watched those same things when I was a kid in New York, and then there were, I want to say that we had 5 television channels, maybe 6 television channels. What was it like? Just because I'm curious now, what was it like in Canada? Were you getting regular, like, was there an American channel or do you have to go through the Canadian content? Just sort of curious.
Yeah, I live in Stratford, Ontario, which is about 2 hours southwest of Toronto. It's kind of in that, kind of triangular part of Canada that juts down kind of between the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
So you're surrounded by the US here.
Right.
And so a lot of the TV channels, you end up getting, even back in the day, were mostly American channels. There'd be
so you were getting the American broadcasts.
Yeah, you're getting stuff from Buffalo and
right.
Yeah, and Detroit and maybe Chicago and places like that. And there's the CBC and the Canadian stuff too. But yeah, we're inundated by American media here, yeah. Which is both good and bad depending on what we're talking about. If you're talking about Batman, great.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then what about comics? How were you, like, was there a drugstore near you or like, what was your first contact with comics?
Yeah, the earliest comics I can remember were sort of, I'd be at the grocery store with my mom or something, and there'd be the little bagged, like 2 or 3 comics kind of bagged for $1 or something. Right. And, I'd always bug her to buy me those. And I would get, so I had, quite a few kind of, department store or grocery store comics. And then by the time I was, 12 or 13, the local mall had like a big bin of kind of recent comic books that were 3 for $1. And I would just get in there and rummage around.
Uh-huh.
And then, once there was a local comic book store, once you get into the 80s and a local comic book store opened, like, holy, it was so exciting to realize there was such a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Know that feeling. Did you go to school to study comics or just illustration in general?
Yeah, I didn't really, I knew I wanted to do comics, but like when I was coming up, was it like now where you could go, to art school or, even certain college programs and kind of study comics specifically. But I knew this was what I wanted to do. So first of all, I had a great high school art teacher, Linda Maskell at Central Elgin in St. Thomas, Ontario. Fantastic. Give her a shout out. Who really stressed like life drawing. She would have one of the students be a model, not nude, of course, but, clothed. And, we would kind of, draw them like you would in a real life drawing session. Whereas a lot of high school art students are making paper mache, whatever. She was like, no, drawing skills, or like drilled that into us. Amazing. And so when I got to university, did a little bit of fine art, a little bit of film, a little bit of drama, a little bit of English literature, a little bit of creative writing. Like I said, I kind of tried to put myself together in education in comics without really calling it that, but with that eventual goal in mind, for sure.
Yeah. And how did your first comic come about? Not the ones that you made at home, but first book that you did it with Jay Torres, right?
Yes, that's what I kind of consider my first I kind of diddled around in the 90s with kind of really small black and white indie comic stuff that was not good. But kind of my first professional work was that book with Jay Torres, which was called Days Like This, which I do not have a copy of. I didn't know we'd be going that far back. That's a deep cut. But yeah, like I said, I was doing illustration for a living but really wanted to do comics. And so I started a webcomic, which this was 23 years ago, right, when webcomics were just starting to be a thing. There was, maybe 10 or 12 people doing them. Not like now where everyone's got a webcomic. It was easier to get noticed back then doing webcomics. But I started doing that just to kind of scratch that itch. I had no idea that would be my way into the business. That wasn't quite a thing yet. For years, I had carried my portfolio around to conventions and showed editors and mailed in sample packages and all the things you were supposed to do in the 90s to try to break in. And just nothing. Like it was a bad time. The kind of bottom
Sure.
had dropped out of things for a while in the 90s there, and the kind of graphic novel thing from the 2000s hadn't started yet. So I fell into that weird valley in between and just couldn't get anything going. But I started this webcomic just for fun. And Jay Torres ended up being one of the people who was reading that webcomic. Mm-hmm. And so he started emailing me saying, hey, I love your stuff, blah, blah, blah. And eventually, after a little bit of back and forth, he was like, I've got this pitch at Oni Press. You'd be a perfect artist for it. Mm-hmm. And, I was like, yeah, whatever. By then I'd kind of given up. I'd kind of given up breaking into comics. And then, a short while later, he was like, hey, I got the green light. I've told Jamie Rich, who was the editor-in-chief at Oni then, about you. And, he's seen some of your stuff from, the submissions and stuff I'd been sending out and all that business. And pretty soon I was doing comics,
Nice.
Just you think you're going to kind of kick in the door, but you end up sort of sneaking in a window.
Yeah. Also, I love in that story that the submissions, the over the transom submissions that you did actually did help. That Jamie had seen it. He was aware of you. He just hadn't written you a letter or pulled the trigger on his own. It took something else to make that happen.
At the time, it just felt like I was spinning my wheels in the dirt. But like you say, all that stuff did eventually kind of pay off. Because, just getting your work in front of people in any way, may pay off at some point down the line. You just never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a graphic novel, right? It wasn't serialized.
Yeah, we kind of hit right. It came out in 2003, which was right just about the start of that breakthrough for graphic novels and bookstores. It was the year of Blankets and Jimmy Corrigan and all that stuff. And Jay had actually pitched it as a 4-issue miniseries, but the guys at Oni, shortly after greenlighting it, were like, could you do this as an original graphic novel? And we were like, oh, sure. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we kind of hit that dawn of the graphic novel era, just right dead on. Yeah. Which works well for me. I've always thought of myself as more of a graphic novel guy. I just in terms of kind of the pace of my work, I like to really kind of, take those quiet beats and take my time and all that stuff. I find the graphic novel format works better for me anyway. So yeah, I'm kind of pretty happy to have kind of delayed the start of my career until that era began.
How is that transition from doing webcomics to doing a graphic novel in terms of, I'm assuming that your webcomic you were probably not posting more than 3 or 4 pages at most, versus doing 100+ page book.
Yeah. I was doing a few panels a day, I think. I was doing like a daily strip. Uh-huh. It was kind of an adventure strip. Yeah, 3 or 4 panels a day. It got to be pretty hard to keep up with pretty quickly. I definitely bit off more than I could chew, and I only did it for a few months, but it was enough to get some attention from the right people. Anyway,
and so to then move to a long form process was that hard at all? Is I guess what my question was.
Well, like I say, I didn't do the webcomic very long, so I don't think I had enough time to really fall into any kind of habits in terms of
right.
Pacing and stuff like that. Yeah, I really kind of jumped with both feet into the graphic novel format and didn't look back.
Yeah. And then you just started writing your own graphic novels.
Yeah, I think I always knew that I wanted to eventually do my own stuff, but as virtually anyone will tell you, it's kind of easier to break in as an artist first.
Sure.
Just so much easier to show people pages than it is to get them to read a script. So Jay and I actually did 2 books together. It was Days Like This and then Scandalous, which was a follow-up that we did that virtually nobody remembers. Mm-hmm. But yeah, after that, I started, I kind of had a relationship with the folks at Oni by then, and started pitching them my own stuff. And I think I pitched them a couple of things, but one of them was a book called Northwest Passage, which was eventually the one that they kind of decided on and greenlit. So that ended up being the first thing I wrote myself.
Yeah, and you got an Eisner nom for that.
Yes, I did. I actually, for that second book with Jay, Scandalous, I got nominated for the Russ Manning Award.
Oh, nice.
Which was a nice, if anything came out of that book, which I say very few people remember, it was that, which probably helped when I started pitching my own stuff.
Yeah, and for people at home who may not be aware, the Russ Manning Award is for most promising newcomer.
That's right.
Most talented newcomer, promising. I think
something like that.
Yeah.
I'll take either one.
Yeah.
Either one is a compliment. And so it was a real honor to be nominated for that. It was a real honor to be nominated for the Eisner for my first kind of book that was all me. And Northwest Passage kind of sold well enough and got enough attention that I was busy for about a decade after that. Once you've done a book that has made any kind of money for anyone, publishers start coming to you, being like, "What would you like to do next?" Mm-hmm. And so I talked myself into a lot of work after that. Yeah.
And so in addition to the successful part, right? Yeah. Like you were nominated for an Eisner for your first solo work. Did that make it easier or harder for you? If that question parses at all? Like, did you feel? Yeah. But I guess sorry. Let me try that a different way. Did you feel like you had to do better?
Oh, I see.
Right, because like out of the gate, like you have this success, and then
I mean, any amount of success definitely makes it easier in terms of getting more work out there. Like that first book is always the hardest sell.
Sure.
And, once you've done that, you kind of have a career. But yes, like creatively, in terms of, I mean, I do this anyway. Like award nominations or not, I'm always trying to top myself. I always want the next book to be better than the previous book. I don't know if that's an outgrowth of any kind of success or just an outgrowth of me being who I am. If I felt like the books were getting worse, that would be a terrible feeling. I always want the next book to be better. And I usually feel like it is when people are like, what's your favorite book that you've done? I'm always, the next one.
Nice.
Know? Yeah. And it, I kind of like it. I kind of like being able to work at a high level, having people's expectations be at a high level.
Sure.
I like the challenge. Like I say, I don't ever want to phone it in anyway, but knowing that people are looking means I'm definitely not going to phone it in.
Yeah.
Which works out well for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With Northwest Passage in particular, I mean, it was historical fiction. It was, not historical fiction, but Canadian historical fiction, which is not exactly what one considers a commercial pathway to success, right?
Yeah. A lot of my books have just been so weird. Like, I seem to be, allergic to blatantly commercial ideas. But, sometimes you get just the right publisher. Like Oni at the time were really swinging for the fences and like trying to be weird and putting out books that no one else was putting out. And when I pitched them Northwest Passage, Jamie Rich again was he's like, we've been looking for a Western, but wanted like an unconventional one. And I pitched it as a sort of a Canadian Western, canoes instead of horses and, coonskin caps instead of, 10-gallon hats. And that was the pitch, like a Canadian frontier Western. And they, like, to Oni's credit, they really dug that idea.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. And, his historical comics have become kind of a thing and Canadian historical comics as well. But at the time, it was a really weird pitch.
Yeah.
But very happy to have a publisher who just wanted weird pitches, It's great. Yeah.
That's great. And since then, you've done a fair amount of historical fiction.
Yeah, and not just fiction, historical nonfiction as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
One of the books that, the book I'm best known for here in Canada, and this one I do have, is called Two Generals, which is one of the books I kind of talked myself into after Northwest Passage came out. And this was the first graphic novel from McClelland and Stewart, who are a venerable Canadian literary publisher. They publish prime ministers' memoirs and Margaret Atwood, like a lot of publishers at the time. They were like, graphic novels seem like they're becoming a thing. And I knew that they liked history and I knew that they liked kind of Canadian stuff. And so I pitched them this. And it worked out great. This is taught in, high schools and universities here in Canada. And it's crazy. It's just still going 13 years later. But this is about my grandfather's experiences in World War II. So it's was my first kind of foray into nonfiction, which was a whole different thing in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I've found writing nonfiction is just very different from writing fiction.
In what particular way?
I like to describe it as kind of subtractive instead of additive. Like with fiction, when you're making up a story, you're starting with a blank screen or a blank page, and you're filling it up with stuff, and you're telling yourself a story, and you're kind of done when you say you are.
Yeah.
When you're happy with it, you're like, the end. Send. Nonfiction, like I say, is subtractive. You're doing a bunch of research on whatever your subject is, and you've got to kind of find a story in that research. And so you're once you kind of find a thread, find a theme, find something in there, you're chipping away all the bits of research that don't speak to that theme or that idea that you have.
Yeah.
And what's left at the end of that process is your story. So yeah, I find, like, in terms of writing, it's almost like turning the process inside out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. It seems to me that comics are almost perfect for doing that, though, because comics are already a reductive business in terms of finding the perfect image, removing all the extraneous images in between.
Yeah.
So you would agree with that?
I absolutely would. Yeah. I think about this a lot. For all comics' kind of traditional reputation about being about superheroes like knocking buildings over on each other, they actually work really well when they go small and kind of work as efficiently as possible. Like you say, finding that one image or that, simplifying that line of dialogue, to the point where it's a very, it can be a very minimalistic and powerful and subtle art form. Yeah. And I find it does work well with nonfiction and for any kind of storytelling, really. The ability to suggest things in comics is one of the best things about the form.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Absolutely. I mean, the audience has control over comics in a way that it doesn't really in any other medium that I can think of. The reader even though you, the cartoonist, are controlling the pacing, the reader controls how time works within that pacing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I control the pacing, but they control the speed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. Yeah. Utterly fascinating.
It's such a unique art form in so many ways. I love it.
Yeah. Just the last kind of bit on that particular line of questioning, because so much of the stuff that you've been doing has been historical in one way or another, does that speak to your specific interests, or did you kind of fall into that, if that question makes sense?
Well, I never studied history or anything. I'm not a historian per se, but as a writer, you're always kind of looking for inspiration for stories. People are always asking, where do you get your ideas? And history is full of them. History is stories. Story is right there in the word. And I just find, reading history, it's a fantastic place to get inspiration for your writing, whether you're going to write about historical subjects or not. But virtually anything you can think of, and many things that you can't, have happened to people at some point over the past couple of thousand years. Some amazing, unbelievable things have happened in history, and sometimes it's really fun to get around, dig into the details of them, and that inevitably ends up informing your own writing. Two generals I got inspired to do because my grandfather passed away in 1997, and I, at that time, as we were kind of cleaning out his house and things, I found his 1943 diary.
Oh, wow.
And began to read it. As you can imagine, there's some, pretty alarming stuff in there.
Sure.
At the time, I was not thinking about doing a book, but, a decade or so later, I began to, once I was about the age that he was in the war, he was in about his early 30s. Mm-hmm. He was not one of the enlisted men, but he was an officer who was a little bit older. And I began to just get really curious, like a lot of veterans. He didn't talk a lot about all that.
Sure.
But I just began to get intensely curious, especially having read this diary about what all went on over there. And so I had a career in comics by this point, as we've talked about. And so I kind of used the book as an excuse to just do all the research that would have to be done to kind of find out. There's an old saying, if you want to know everything about a subject, write a book about it.
Sure.
It's a great motivator to just do all the available research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we're looking at a book like Squire at Night, are you doing research for like medieval armor or things like that? Or is it purely at this point, you're just coming up with like the zeitgeist informs you?
Sure. I mean, a little bit. Like if you're going to have a castle in a story, you need to know a little bit about how a castle works. And you can sort of fantasize from there about, how do we make this castle bigger and better and taller and, more fantasy-like. And the same with armor and weapons and stuff. You kind of look at the real thing and then you dream a little bigger. But mostly with this, I was less inspired by historical, knights and squires than I was by sort of, fantasy role-playing games and, the kind of, the kind of high fantasy that we're all now used to from, Tolkien and Dungeons and Dragons and all that stuff. It's more of that kind of a fantasy world than any kind of actual reflection of medieval Europe.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
Where did the seed of the idea come from?
Well, I'm always trying to find a way to put this as kind of gently as possible. This was kind of my pandemic era book, kind of what I was writing and thinking about during all that. And, there was a certain amount of, during the pandemic and sort of the political era of that time, and that we're still kind of in, where, anti-intellectualism kind of seemed like it was a problem. That's always been part of our culture. But I feel like there was a stretch there in the last 7 or 8 years where we've kind of seen just how dangerous that can be, exactly where that leads you.
Yep.
And I hadn't done a book for kids in a while and wasn't planning on it, but I had this idea in my pocket kind of about this squire and knight, and the knight would be, a kind of a bumbling goof, and the squire would be the smart one who did all the work. And it just kind of seemed to fit what I was thinking about, during that time. And so, I feel like a message of, reading is cool. being smart is better than the alternative. This is a good message for kids. And, without kind of beating those ideas over the head and being a lecture, which I never like in a story. I just wanted to write a story that explored those themes and to also catch a young audience with that. I don't even want to say lesson, but just with those themes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's funny because those central characters in that central conflict is certainly a huge part of the book. But, I found myself kind of most attracted to the dragon and the dog. Right.
Right. You and everyone else. Yeah.
Sure the kids all really liked as well.
Yeah. Everyone loves that dragon, man.
Yeah.
I get so many. First thing people want to tell me about Squire and Knight since it came out is how much they love the dragon.
Yeah. And it's a pretty non-traditional design for a dragon as well.
Yeah, it's tough. I think I mentioned this in the sort of back matter. There's a bit of making of material at the end of the book where I talk about how hard it is to come up with any kind of fresh take on a dragon, which is as, age old a part of storytelling as you could imagine. Dragons have been with us for as long as there have been stories. It's a little bit the dragon from Sleeping Beauty. something that fits my style well was a dragon without a lot of detail, which was, I knew we'd be seeing it in the sky a lot.
Huh?
Every time we see the dragon in the book, we're a little bit closer to it, but a lot of the time we're seeing it just fly over, and I just wanted it to be, to read from a distance like that, just, kind of be like a hole in the sky. And so, I settled pretty quickly on a black silhouette, but just like the personality of the dragon, I think is what a lot of people are responding to. And it just took a while to kind of settle on. I kept hearing Bill Murray's voice. Like to me, it was like if this were an animated film, this character would be played by Bill Murray.
That's funny.
And that's how I ended up there.
I love it.
And but yeah, that was one of the hardest parts, was trying to figure out a dragon that hasn't been done to death. Just done a million times. Yeah.
Well, and the ghost dog too. I mean, I loved the ghost dog. Skeleton dog, I guess.
Yeah,
not really
ghost, he's a lot of fun, and I didn't want to do a zombie dog specifically because Tim Burton did it with Frankenweenie, and also because it's for kids. I didn't want to have like a dog that had like flesh hanging off it, right. A bunch of gross stuff. A skeleton seemed cleaner, So I settled on that fairly quickly.
And it has this wonderful cartooniness of the dog's got ears, but there aren't bones in the ears.
right? Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that, like, I don't really, write for kids a lot differently than I write for adults, but there is a certain amount that you can just give yourself a pass on stuff like that. You're like, adults would question this, but kids are just like, the dog needs to have ears if it's going to be as a dog. And just here you go.
No, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And you also talk about craft just for a minute. Like, you made I thought a very interesting decision that 80 or 90% of the book is set at nighttime. One particular night at that, but it's all very dark. It's a very dark palette. It's talk about that for a minute.
The book printed a little darker than I had anticipated, and that's nothing. On the folks at First Seconds, we did a million kind of test printings and stuff, and I chose that paper and all that stuff, and generally I wanted it dark. For all that it's a fantasy story, it's also very much a mystery story at heart, and it's without spoiling a bunch of stuff for people who are maybe about to read the book. Light is very important, and the contrast of light and darkness. There's a pretty obvious metaphor there, frankly, of shining a light in the dark, and knowledge and information, dispelling the ignorance and all that stuff. The metaphor of that kid holding that lantern up and peering into the dark, couldn't be more what the book's about. So it was going to be a kind of a dark, I knew the kid was going to spend a lot of the story wandering around the forest in the dark, down the bottom of that well in the dark, and all that stuff. It was going to be a dark story in any case.
Yeah. No, it was a nice technique, and not one. It made the book look very different than most graphic novels that, especially ones that are aimed at kids, tend to be super colorful, almost distractingly colorful. And the darkness of the palette in this, I just thought was very strong and very striking.
It was very helpful that the other color, it's kind of I'm working with 4 shades of orange and 4 shades of gray in the book, because I find a limited palette works well on my stuff. And it was really helpful that the other color that wasn't gray was orange. When there is color, it's a nice bright orange.
Yeah. That makes sense. So how did you pitch a book like this? Did you just come up with a 2-page thing, or did you start writing a script? Did you have a home for it, I guess, is my question, when you started working on the book, if you see what I mean?
I had been trying to work with First Seconds forever, basically as long as they've been around. They were always my kind of top of list publisher when it came to pitching something. but they have very particular tastes. They have always encouraged me to pitch them, but boy, did I have to come up with just the right thing, because they passed on everything I've done since about 2007 before we got to Squire and Knight. But my pitch for Squire and Knight was basically a 1-page plot outline,
okay,
and maybe a couple of pages of art. Yeah, I think a couple of pages of like inked, yeah, but not colored art. Maybe a couple of character designs, which you also see in the making of stuff at the end of the book. And yeah, my agent had a chance encounter with Mark Siegel, the publisher at First Second, in the lunch line at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival in 2017. Was it 2017? Yeah, it might have been. Maybe 2017 or 18.
Uh-huh.
And we had a nice little chat over lunch, and got up and I immediately got on my phone and emailed my agent and said, I think Mark Siegel is ripe for a pitch, like right now.
Nice.
And he was. I mean, I guess I must have, by that point I was, clearly I had the Squire and Knight pitch, at least the bare bones of it by that point. Nice.
Yeah, Mark's a really nice guy too. I like that guy tremendously.
I have loved working with him and everybody at First Second so far. I'm not just trying to butter their bread here. Like they have been exactly the publisher I hoped they would be.
Yeah.
Like I've worked with a number of publishers throughout my career, and there's always pros and cons. Most of them have been, perfectly fine to work with, but like across the board at First Second, they are so professional.
Yeah.
And they understand comics too.
Oh, yeah. What I've seen from some of the other book specific publishers is while they see the value of comics, they don't necessarily innately understand the form. I have run up against that a number of times in my career. I made the kind of jump from the sort of, comics direct market world to the book publishing world fairly early. It was just after Northwest Passage there in 2007. And yes, that is something I have definitely run up against. They kind of get the impression they should be publishing comics, like you say, but they don't necessarily understand them. I find some are coming around, some faster than others, but yeah, First Second has been just terrific to work with across the board so far. Just do they just know their business so well. Yeah. No, I mean, I think part of the problem is that you get editors who don't necessarily have a comics background. Yeah, they understand story. They do, yes. But the specifics of the language of comics and what makes the best comics page is a very specific skill set. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Ironically, it's probably the fact that there are now schools and graduate programs that teach comics, which are making comics editors better. Yes. Yeah. It's been a whole thing. But yeah, you've been able, throughout my career, I have kind of watched the learning process to be sure. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about some of the specifics of how you work. I assume you're working first from a script, yeah? Yeah. Some of my cartoonist pals think I'm nuts for writing a script. A lot of people just kind of get into thumbnails first. Mm-hmm. Thumbnail sketches being like a quick layout of the page and just a very fast version of the page. And that's fine. That's kind of how they write. For myself personally, I find it important to take a first pass, the story first, plot, structure, character, theme, dialogue, all that stuff, making sure that's working. I find with a lot of graphic novels that I read, are kind of, they may look beautiful, but are maybe, a bit underdeveloped story-wise. Sure. Maybe that's why. But I've found throughout my career, my scripts have gotten looser. Mm-hmm. On one hand, I find it helpful just to kind of show an editor, what the story is, like what I'm intending to do. Like the script stage is nice. But, also for me, like I say, just to get all that stuff straight. And then I'll start thinking about how to interpret it visually. Yeah. Because I kind of need to know what the themes are before I even settle on a visual structure. Sure. Like that's really important to me, to just not have the panel layout be some generic comics panel layout.
Like, to me, the layout is so inextricably linked to the theme of the book that I really have to know what that is first before I start laying out pages, if that makes sense. Yeah,
that does make sense. Yeah. The great thing about comics is, I mean, I've been interviewing people for 9 years, 2 interviews a month, so we're at like 250 interviews. I don't know. Everybody has a different answer on this question, right?
I would think. Yeah.
It's the beautiful thing about comics, because when I look at interviews with like filmmakers or prose authors, they all kind of work the same way, but in comics everybody works in a way that works for them,
Totally. Yeah. Another really interesting, unique thing about the medium.
If you handed your script for Squire and Knight to another cartoonist, do you think that they could jump in and draw it, or is it a script that only you can understand what it is that you're trying to get across? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, my scripts at this point have gotten pretty loose. It's really just dialogue and the most bare bone descriptions of actions.
Right.
And it's got page breaks in it, but not panel breaks. Yeah. So, because that's really important to the pacing, those page turns are so important in comics. I mean, I think somebody could draw from one of my scripts, but there would be, there'd be a lot of interpretation on their part, which is perfectly fine. I mean, that's kind of the part of the artist's job to begin with.
Yeah.
So they would have a lot to decide in terms of, what goes in each panel and that kind of thing. But yeah, sure they could.
Have you ever written a script for someone else?
No.
Okay.
I've pitched a couple things.
Yeah.
That I was just going to write, but those have never gone ahead. I've drawn stuff with other writers, but I've never written something someone else has drawn. Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got the script. You've given it to the editor at that point. The editor's giving you some notes.
Sure.
Thumbnails next for you?
Yeah. Then I start thumbnailing things. I'll thumbnail kind of spreads, sort of left-hand page, right-hand page together so that they work. I kind of want each page to work as a unit, but also each spread to work as a unit. Because, I'm very aware that the reader is going to be looking at them, unless they're the type of reader who folds the pages back.
Yeah.
They're probably going to be looking at a spread one time. So try to make sure the spreads work as spreads. And this is a very graphic novel specific kind of thing, though, right? Because in traditional periodical comics, you have absolutely no control over how that spread works. Right. Yeah. And sometimes there's going to be some ads in there, and who knows what. So another reason why I'm thankful to have come along in the graphic novel era. Yeah. But to me, that's where the meat of the storytelling takes place. Like, after the thumbnail, when you get into tight pencils and then inks and all that stuff, you're refining the art. But I feel like by the end of the thumbnail stage, you've got the comic. It's a pretty rough looking version of it, but you've told the story. And that to me, that's I spend probably the most time with the sequel to Squire and Knight, which I'm kind of finishing up now. Boy, did I do so much. I've never done so much story revisions at the thumbnail stage.
Huh.
I really, tore that story apart and then built it back up again in thumbnails.
So does that mean that you were thumbnailing sequences multiple times?
Oh, yes. Yeah. There's a few different versions of the Squire and Knight sequel that exist in thumbnails only.
Yeah. And what do you, because it sounds like this is not a process that you were doing before that you were doing multiple passes through.
Yeah, often, like I said, at the script stage, that's when I do most of my thinking about story. But something about this one just really, I did a lot of rethinking. And I'm never married to the script.
Sure.
It's always kind of draft one.
Sure.
But, boy, did it change a lot, once I started thumbnailing it, more than any book I've ever done. And a real contrast to the first book, by the way. Like the first book just came out almost fully formed. I don't think I've ever had an easier experience writing a story and translating it to the page. yeah, the two experiences couldn't have been more different.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I'm not sure. I mean, every book is different, even books sort of in the same series.
Yeah.
Yeah, some stories are just easier to get out of the ground in one piece than others. You know, it just depends on, it depends on any number of factors. Who even knows? But book 2 definitely got shaped more and more as I worked on it.
So which
is fine. I mean, that's
sure,
part of the writing. Yeah, it's part of the writing process. You know, as the old saying is, writing is rewriting.
Yeah.
You know, so sometimes that's very much true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said you did your thumbnails with opposing pages. Is it 2 pages per page that you're thumbnailing, or are you doing smaller than that?
Yeah, I'm going through just doing, you know, it'll be page 2 on the left, page 3 on the right. You know, next page is page 4 and 5, blah blah blah, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll think it through that way. Yeah,
like 11.5 by 11 paper.
Yeah. I'm usually doing it on my tablet. I'm usually doing that digitally.
Okay.
Yeah, something about that. Something roughly the size and shape of the book when it's open.
Yeah. So digital thumbs, are you also drawing everything digitally? Are you doing the pencil and inking digitally as well?
I pencil digitally, at least on these last couple of books, but I ink traditionally.
Okay.
Yeah, I find that working digitally for pencils, you know, just really helps me in terms of, it really helps my thinking in terms of, okay, let's try this a little smaller, a little bigger, make that head a little smaller or bigger without having to redraw it. Mm-hmm. You know, in which case I'd probably talk myself out of it. You know, I might talk myself out of trying something a little different if, you know, it involved hours worth of redrawing.
Yeah.
But I find working digitally for pencils really, you know, makes me more inclined to take chances and make that change I'm thinking about making, which probably needs to be made.
Right.
Yeah, like I said, it gives me less excuse to talk myself out of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so and then you print out your pencil on blue line, or
I do. I love inking so much, like traditional inking with a brush or, you know, crow quill or something. Mm-hmm. I just can't give up that part of it. Like it would be easier to not output the boards and rescan them, but I love pushing ink around paper. So, you know, I'll take some shortcuts in the pencil stage. Like I say, with, you know, there's lots of advantages to being able to work in layers and, like I say, resize things if you need to and all that. But when it comes to the lines people see, that's the part I still really want to do by hand.
Yeah.
Do people, since we're talking about pencils, do people want to see some pencils from the sequel?
I think that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm going to quickly share screens and I'm going to pop this up. Are you seeing this?
No.
Okay. Hold on. Oh no, I got to do this. Select a tab to share. Hold on a second. Okay. I'm going to get this. We practiced this in.
Yeah. It's all good.
We practiced this beforehand and here I am messing it up.
No show business.
You're seeing this now, right?
Yeah, we got it now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so here's a 2-page spread, which like really is a 2-page spread from the sequel. And these are my digital pencils. So this is about as much detail as I get into in pencil.
And so even when you're doing the pencils, you're still laying it out lengthwise 2 pages at a time.
For this, yes, because this is a thing that really has to work as a, you know,
as a spread. I said spread. I see.
Yeah. So when you get into individual pages like this,
great.
I'm really planned it out in thumbnails as a spread, but you know, when it gets down to this stage, I'm doing each page individually.
Yeah. And so it looks like you've got the lettering in there already at the pencil stage. Yes,
that's another thing I do is once the script is, you know, mostly there, I will try to. I'm going to stop sharing. This is that's enough of a preview as you guys get for now. Few pages from book 2 there. Yeah, I will lay the dialogue in first because I really like to hand draw word balloons. I don't mind using a font for the lettering itself because my hand lettering is terrible. But I generally dislike digital balloons, which are always just a little too perfect for my taste. You know, a little too obviously digital. And I'm a big believer in the lettering being a part of the art.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way I kind of bridge those two worlds, even when I'm doing, digital lettering, which I do, is to hand draw the word balloons right into the pages.
Yeah.
And so it at least gives it the feel of kind of old school, hand done word balloons.
Yeah. It's interesting. I just noticed, only because we're talking about it, I start flipping and thinking, but almost all of your balloons, except for exclamations, are all they're square rather than rounded.
I just wanted to do that for this project. I like a lot of European comics.
Yeah.
Some people kind of feel that's pretty obvious with my style. And a lot of the word balloons in European comics are square.
Yeah.
And I've always liked the look of it. And it's a little unconventional here in North America, but because I hand draw the balloons, it's just a little easier to hand ink a square than it is any kind of oval without messing it up. And I also find like the balloons fit in a square panel better that way. So I think I'm definitely going to do it for Squire and Knight, and I'm doing it for the sequel, and I'll probably do it for anything else I do that I'm lettering myself going ahead. I kind of dig it.
Also, my understanding, though I'm not 100% sure about this, but I believe that the reason the European tradition is more square is it makes it easier to translate it into other European languages.
Oh, well,
because there's a consistency of the balloon shape, and you don't have to worry about how the words fit around the oval. If that makes sense. I hadn't
heard that, but that does make perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of my books have been translated into other languages, so hopefully this makes that even easier now for Squire and Knight. That is a nice advantage.
Yeah. Okay, so you print out blue lines, pencils, and then you start inking. How big are you working on a inked page?
I'll show you. I dropped out a frame here.
I'm
gonna pull out some pages. Let me get one that's not too spoilery. Yeah, this isn't too bad. Yeah, I work at the kind of standard, kind of old school 11 by 17 size, kind of a 10 by 15 or so shape within it.
Yeah.
And this is larger than a lot of people are working these days. I know some people work at the smaller kind of manga size now, but my style is so sort of simple, which you think would lend itself well to working smaller. But I actually like to work bigger as a way of sort of tricking myself into putting a little more detail in there.
Yeah.
Because I'll go as simple as I can. But, I also find it nice to, draw the stubble on the guy's chin and, stuff like that.
Yeah.
That I wouldn't necessarily if I were working like really small.
It also tightens up the lines very nicely.
Right. Yeah. I find the bigger you work, sort of the better it. Well, I guess there's a limit to that. At some point you'd be putting too much detail in that wouldn't read at 5 by 8 or however big these books are. But yeah,
I mean, there's some people who work like 4 up, which is that's kind of crazy, to me.
And especially when you see like old comics pages from back in the day. Like last fall, I was at the Billy Ireland Museum at Ohio State University, and saw some Hal Foster Prince Valiant originals, which are like the size of a small dining room table.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Unbelievable. You could just stare at them for hours.
Yeah. I know, you almost wonder how he works so big. It's like.
Yeah. And, maybe there was a million assistants and stuff helping him out, but how did he do a page like that every week for the, it's like, I've seen some of his pages where like, there'll be a crowd of people in the, court, and every person in the crowd is a person. He hasn't roughed in the crowd. He's literally drawn a crowd of people. It's nuts. I hope he got paid well, and had
I think he did.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, especially with ink, because it's just strikes me, maybe I'm wrong, that the bigger you work, the more chances for a smudge or a spill or something, right? Because your work area is so monumental,
Yeah. I love when you see old comics originals and stuff, and there is a little coffee spill down in the corner or something. It's like that checks out. I've got pages like that too.
I especially love old pages with the old lettering that used to get cut out and then put down on the page. You know, I always love that part of the technique. Now, you know, as he's doing it digitally, so it's all right there. It's built into the page. But
yeah. Just same idea, but newer tools.
Yeah. But and so then after you ink it, you scan it back in,
right,
and then go to the coloring stage.
I do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And color is the part I'm least confident about. Whenever people tell me they like the colors in my book, I'm always a little surprised. I don't have that. And I swore up and down I wasn't going to color Squire and Knight, but then the pandemic happened.
Right.
And I was like, I want to really hire a colorist, or should I just keep the money in the house? And so that ended up just being a kind of a financial decision of, you know, let me not pay someone else a bunch of money that I might need, because who knows how long this pandemic is going to last.
Right.
So yeah, I ended up, but I always just try to keep it simple. I mean, like I said before, my style is fairly simple, and it doesn't take a lot of complicated color. Yeah. And so I try to just go in, essentially do flat colors, try to keep it to 2 or 3 colors, which seems like plenty. You know, you kind of layer them in different ways, so it seems like more colors.
Yeah.
And then I'll do sort of one cut, they say, of shadows or something, but I don't get super complicated with lighting.
Yeah.
I really try to think of it more as toning than coloring, just to make sure that I don't get carried away. You know?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Like not a lot of complex rendering, just very simple shapes of color.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you've got a 160-page book here. How long does each stage take you, would you estimate?
Oh.
So like a script.
Yeah.
How fast are you writing that script?
Writing is the hardest one to nail down because, you know, it's not just typing, right? You're working like you're writing as fast as you're thinking of stuff. So, you know, I've written scripts in 6 weeks, and I've written scripts in 6 months, depending on, like we were talking about earlier, how easy the story comes. Yeah. So that one's the hardest to really it's hard to tell your publisher, yeah, I'll write this thing in X number of weeks, because, you know, it could be anything.
What did it work out with Squire, though? Because you said Squire went really smoothly.
This book I wrote pretty fast. I can't remember exactly how fast, but it might have been as quick as like 4 or 6 weeks for the script.
Nice.
Yeah. Like I say, this story just came out of me.
Yeah.
almost fully formed. Then
thumbnails?
Yeah, thumbnails. Like I say, that's the part I really, even though the drawings are quick, it's where you're doing a lot of the thinking. So probably, you know, at least 3-4 months for thumbs. Let's call it 6 months for pencils, 6 months for inks.
Interesting. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Probably about a solid year for that kind of pencils and inks part of it. And then, you know, I color fairly quickly because my style is so simple, like we talked about. So maybe 2 more months for coloring. Right. Yeah. All in all, Squire Knight probably took me about a year and a half, which is fast for me. Yeah. You know, that's a pretty fast graphic novel.
Yeah. I mean, that's relatively, that's a page a day.
Yeah.
Relatively.
Yeah. So yeah, probably about that. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm a little surprised that penciling and inking take longer than the thumbs, because as you say, you're solving a lot of the specifics of storytelling in the thumbs.
You're doing a lot of the thinking in the thumbs. But a lot of just the kind of heavy lifting in terms of the drawing, the rendering itself, that takes so much time in the penciling and inking. Yeah.
How much of your time doing thumbs is concerned more with flow and page break than it is specific rendering? I guess is how I would phrase it.
I don't think about rendering at all at the thumb stage. Yeah. My thumbs are really quick and loose and dirty. Yeah. Just essentially stick figures.
Yeah.
I'm a big storytelling guy. Like
Yeah.
I almost, like we were talking about before about layout, like I really want the layout to kind of fit the themes of the book. And I almost, want the story to be able to read even if the panels were empty. I think a lot about layout and pacing and readability and all that stuff before I really start worrying about the quality of the drawing at all.
Right.
Yeah.
What about the page turn? How much do you think about that?
Oh, a lot. Even at the script stage. Like I say, even if even later in my career, as my scripts got looser, the page breaks are still in there because I'm really thinking about that. It's one of the really great gifts that comics creators have is that every second page you get that reveal.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, it's really nice.
Yeah.
It's really nice to be able to have, a little cliffhanger every second page.
Yeah.
In a big moment every page after that, if you want.
Well, and it keeps things propulsive. It keeps it moving.
And you've got to utilize that. And it's, as far as I'm concerned, you've got to bake that in right from the start. So like I say, those page scripts are usually in the script. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you said that you're already working on volume 2 of this. Is this a 2-book series, or is there going to be more?
Yeah, the sequel is nearly done. I probably have another 6 weeks or so, maybe 5 or 6 weeks of coloring to do, but it's mostly it's mostly done. It's behind schedule. It kind of should have been done by now, but it's comics. Everyone's always behind, but it's close. It's close to being finished. And so far First Second hasn't committed to a third book, but I'm hoping they will. Everybody go buy the first book. and that'll convince them.
Tried. I did my part, man.
Yeah, you're doing great.
I'm impressed that you're almost done with volume 2 already. Does that mean that it's coming out like next summer?
I know they were aiming to have the second book come out a year after book 1, which would mean next spring. I think I'm behind enough that's, don't quote me on this, but I think it's probably more likely next fall. We haven't revisited the schedule recently.
Right.
But I would certainly think next year, though, sometime.
Yeah.
I don't think we're into spring of 2025. I think we're still in 2024 sometime. Like I said, don't quote me. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Is it also 160 pages ish?
It is a little shorter.
Okay.
I think book 2 is 146 pages.
Okay.
So it's close. Another thing I love about the graphic novel format is you take the page count you need.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be 22 pages or whatever monthly comics are these days. It's one can be 164 and book 2 can be 146, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's all good.
It's interesting because I think that that younger cartoonists who are coming straight out of school and doing a graphic novel as their first thing, I tend to think that broadly one of the biggest problems is that people are doing these 200 and 300 page books,
right?
And they don't actually have 300 pages of story,
right?
They just somehow think that, oh my god, I'm this giant tome,
right? Yeah. I like the more, kind of relaxed pace, I guess is what I want to say of graphic novels that, give you the real estate on the page to have those smaller moments and stuff. But yes, you shouldn't take that for granted. Not every book needs to be, 400 pages. Yeah. I find about 150 pages works great for any particular story I'm trying to tell. Two Generals was about that. Squire and Knight is about that. Yeah. The longest book I've ever done, Bix, which, we didn't talk about, but is also very much not for kids. This is the longest book I've ever done. It's 250.
Yeah.
So, even my longest, most epic book, 250 pages even.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to go too crazy, kids.
Yeah. Well, and if it takes you a year to do 160 pages, I mean, right? Like you also
have to think,
you kind of want to have a book a year.
Sure.
Yeah.
yeah, you kind of want this thing to come out eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, God bless Craig Thompson for doing blankets and those kind of things. But
Sure.
yeah, that can't be. You can't do one of those every year or two.
No, you sure cannot.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. And it's worth it in the end for someone like him. But, again, there's so many cartoonists who never get the success, and they work for a long time for a thing, and then it kind of comes out and nobody cares.
Sure.
And then where are you as in your career, That's
the thing, is you can never be sure. Like, you're taking a gamble, even, 20 years and 14 books into my career. I'm never sure what the reaction to any particular book is going to be. I've always done well enough to keep going, but yeah, I can never, some of my books have done really well, and some of my books have just kind of fallen off a cliff.
Right.
And I never know. I never know until they come out which is which.
Well,
this is,
this is why I asked that question about the Eisner Awards on your first thing, because that's kind of a psychological barrier to have to face,
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, it's not been a thing for me. I'd push myself. I'd push myself pretty hard anyway.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a really strange question here, and it's all Callum Johnson's fault.
Oh.
Cal happened to mention that you've got a really beautiful singing voice. He told me to put you on the spot about it, so I'm going to put you on the spot about it.
You have done it. Man, I don't know. I'm sure there's a story behind this that probably involves, a bar in Halifax.
Don't they all, though? Don't they all?
Yeah. I'm not even sure exactly what he's referring to, but I can, if you get me to karaoke or something,
all right,
I'll perform.
Okay.
All right. I don't know if it's gonna happen here, but after hours.
I just thought if I threw it out that maybe you'd pick it up and lob it back, But I totally get not doing that, so that's fine.
Yeah, Cal is the best, and Strange Adventures is a great shop.
Yeah,
and I'm hoping to see those guys this fall out at Decaf. So it's been too long. But apparently there's a story. I'm going to have him remind me what the story is behind that, because I don't remember, and there's probably a good reason I don't remember, frankly.
I understand.
Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap this up. Just
sure.
like the start of the show, I start with the same questions. I always end the show with the same questions too. We know what your next book's going to be. At least we know you're doing a sequel to this, which is coming out very soon. Do you have something else other than that you would like to plug? You may not be able to, but
Yeah, nothing. I'm not exactly sure what my next thing is going to be. There's a couple of possibilities, but neither of which, the fish isn't entirely in the boat yet.
Understood.
So it could be one of a couple of different things. So I'll leave that tantalizingly out there.
Sure. After working on, 2 kids graphic novels like this, do you feel like you want to continue working with young reader material, or are you kind of itching to do something more, ponderous and serious?
I would happily keep going with Squire and Knight for the rest of my career if First Second is interested. So again, everyone go by Squire and Knight.
Yep.
I could do like 10 more of these. It would be fine. I'd be perfectly happy. These characters are so much fun. Yeah, and from there we'll see. Like, I do like to mix it up. Like, if you look at the books I've done and the order I've done them in, I tend to like to go from one thing to something as different as you can get.
Sure.
But I also, tend to, you also don't necessarily get to choose which of your projects get greenlit. Someone else is choosing that. So,
sure.
Yeah, we'll see. It could go either direction at this point.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. It's interesting again, because sometimes you get people who are better known for doing adult material, and then they switch to kids, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm doing now. Like, I like this show,
Yeah.
Like, because it's a different kind of language. It's a different, even though it's still comics, right? Like,
Yeah.
specific to the tone of it become very different, you know?
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, like I've always done well enough to kind of keep working, which, you know, is a big win in any kind of creative field.
Yeah.
But I've also never been successful enough at any one thing that I've got pigeonholed in that thing. You know, some people know my kind of more adult historical stuff, and that's great. And some people know me from, you know, my more kind of younger reader stuff, and that's great too. And you know, I've even had at signings and stuff, like had a dad who's a fan of Two Generals and a kid who's a fan of like my Three Thieves books and stuff. And they're realizing at that moment that I'm the same guy.
Right.
Who, you know, makes the comics that they both like. They had never put it together until that moment, which is fine. Like I really like creatively kind of moving around and switching from thing to thing. And it's kind of a blessing to have never been sort of, you know, cornered into just kind of making the same book over and over.
Yeah.
You know, like I definitely know, some really famous cartoonists who, you know, are famous for a thing, and that is the thing they do. Yeah. And they probably couldn't shift gears and do something else at this point in their careers. And
yeah,
it's a blessing and a curse. Right.
Yeah.
So
100%.
You know, yeah.
100%.
Yep.
All right. And then as the final question, as I said, this is a series of interviews with cartoonists. We talk to a lot of people. And so we have a fair number of people who are watching these series because they want to make comics themselves.
Sure.
And I hear from a good number of people of, well, I want to make comics, but I'm not sure how to start. I don't know what to do. I'm not confident in my own work, whatever their reasoning may be there. So if you were to give a piece of advice to an aspiring cartoonist, and it can be anything. It can be something physical, craft-wise. It can be something emotional. It can be something spiritual. Anything you want. But if you were to give a piece of advice to an aspiring cartoonist who's just not sure the best way to go, what might that advice be?
Yeah, I think it would be just to kind of have the confidence to start. I used to teach writing for comics at an art school in Toronto. I was the writer in residence at a Canadian university here in 2015 for a term. I've talked to a lot of student writers and particularly, you know, aspiring comics writers. And I have found that what young writers, you know, of any variety mostly need is just, you know, the courage to just get the clay on the table and start messing around with it. You know, I could give you all kinds of advice about, you know, the kind of mechanics of how comics work and all that stuff. But a lot of that you're going to figure out yourself. Sure. Just by doing it. And yeah, so I find what a lot of young readers need is just young writers need is just a little push, you know, just go do it. Go do the thing. Make your comic. When I was younger, I thought there was, you know, a point where like, you know, you got a phone call from Stan Lee or somebody saying, "Hello, Scott. This is Stan Lee. Would you like a job at Marvel Comics?" You know, that's not how it works. You know, like me with my webcomic that I started doing way back in the day, you've got to just start making comics and putting them out there, whether a webcomic or zines or, you know, like whatever. Just start doing it. You will figure out the craft as you go. Certainly take the advice from all the people about what you're doing, but, you know, a lot of it you're just going to pick up when you, you know, start that process of, you know, trying to figure out what goes on the page and all that stuff. Just get started. You know, confidence. One of my favorite pieces of writing advice is from a young adult author named Lainey Taylor, who one of her pieces of writing advice she often gives is write like you have an invisible machete strapped to your hip. And yeah, just get in there. Yeah. I like this. You're probably not as good yet as you want to be, but you're not going to get there unless you just start doing it and hack your way through that jungle and get there. Yeah.
Though, you know, I got to say, when you mentioned the just getting a call from Stan Lee or whatever, as you know, I write a business column about comics called Tilting at Windmills.
Yep.
Right after the very first episode of that appeared, the phone suddenly rang one day, and it was Harlan Ellison. And Harlan Ellison, and I didn't know him. I had never met him. And he's like, kid, because that's how he talks to you. Kid, you got to keep writing this. You got to keep doing this. And I was like, I wasn't sure that I was going to write another one. And getting that phone call from Harlan Ellison actually was the thing that really made me go, okay, well, now I'm at almost 300 columns at this point. So
yeah, man. Well, if Harlan Ellison said,
it works the other way too.
Right, exactly. If Harlan Ellison says you gotta, then you gotta.
Right, man. Okay, I'm gonna put you on. We're gonna go back to a one on me. You hang out for a minute, Scott. I gotta do a little house cleaning here, and then we'll come back and wrap this up. Okay, so you at home, you're sitting at home. You don't know what to do. Hell, you might still have some pandemic thing where you're kind of having to stay home anyway, right? You want to read something. Really, really good book. Really, really good book. Fantastic cartooning. A lot of heart, a lot of brains. You are going to love Squire and Knight. You should buy it. You can buy it from us too. There should be a link somewhere in the video. There's that. But then there should be a direct link to this particular book on the video somewhere. I don't quite know how it works. It's all magic to me. But for sure, we'll sell you this book or get it from your local store, whatever works out. Our next show is next Wednesday. And it's the Adult Club. Our book will be Adherent by Chris Kim, which is this beautiful, kind of haunting, gorgeous piece of work. This is a really good book. I'm really looking forward to talking to Chris Kim next Wednesday. In roughly a month, our next kids club will be a Bach Ness Monster. This is by Sarah. I'm going to mangle this one. Sarah Gator and Natalie Rice. They did Dungeon Critters before this, which was a great, fantastic book. So I think you're going to love this one. And then our next adult club after that is Tien Pham's Family Style, about his family bringing him here from Vietnam. Very smart book. This one, Tien's going to be, because he's local, he's going to be here in the store, and we're going to have a live audience. We're going to go back to having a live audience again. Boy, that'll be fun. And so look forward to those next couple of shows, right? You can hit the bell or whatever in the corner and sign up. And I love these shows. I love doing them. I love bringing them to you. So do that. I have a couple thanks I want to make. I need to thank Jordan, my producer, for all the backstage stuff that nobody sees. I want to thank Ben for running the show and running the camera and putting up the chyrons and all that stuff. He's my son, and I love him so much, and he does a great job here. I want to thank my staff, KATT, Zoe, and Katie, who they basically allow me to be able to have the time to sit in front and talk to cartoonists. I wouldn't be able to do it otherwise, and I appreciate them in every way that you can imagine. They're the best staff the comic shop has, and they love comics too. We all love comics here. We love comics, and we hope we communicate that to you. And then, we couldn't do this without cartoonists. And so I especially want to thank cartoonists in general, but Scott in particular. Thank you, my friend, for making a great book. And this is really a great book. It has a lot of heart. As I said, it is gorgeous. It is smart. It has a message, but not a beat yourself head over the, with a hammer kind of message. So, dude, thank you, man. Thank you for making comics, and I hope that you've got another 20 years worth of comics in you.
I hope so, too. I hope so, too, believe me. Yeah, and thank you for having me on. This has been a great chat. I only just noticed that we've gone nearly an hour and a half. It flew by. It was such
right, and it seems like it's like 20 minutes or something. Yep,
exactly. Yeah.
That's what I try to do here.
Amazing.
So, awesome. Well, that's what I have for everybody. And Scott, hang for a second after this, but we're going to say goodbye, and we will see you next time. Thanks very much.